Welcome back, students! In this lesson, I will show you how to create obstacles and how to destroy them. But before that, we have to change sorting layer of our columns. I have noticed that they have moved behind our ground. That's why we have to expand our columns, find column sprite 0, find sorting layer and change it to mid, and do the same for column sprite 1. And that's it. Now we can move to creating obstacles. There are many ways you could do it, and I have chosen the simplest one to explain you. Basically, we will have two triggers. First trigger will spawn our columns and second one will destroy our columns. So let's get to work. First thing I would like us to do is make a prefab of our columns. So go to Project, right click, create folder named Prefabs, and just drag our columns to Prefabs. We should delete our columns from hierarchy, but it will come in handy later. Now the next step we should do is make a trigger that will spawn our obstacles. That trigger has to be attached to something. That's why we will create an empty object. Right click in hierarchy, create empty, and name it spawn. Let's add trigger collider by clicking on add component, physics 2D, box collider 2D, and checking is trigger box. Now let's edit this collider. Right now it is on our bird and we want to move it next to our column. It also needs to be taller, but width is not important. Now let's create a spawn script. So go to Project, right click, create C# script and call it spawn. Let's drag it first to our object and then to our folder, and double click to open it. Now let me explain you why did we make a prefab out of our columns. Well, we will not add our columns by ourselves. We will specify when anything hits our trigger, our prefab gets cloned. So in this script we will use our prefab and we have to make a variable for it. It will be public game object called prefab. And now next thing. Our clones will be the same, but they will not have the same Y position, because there is no logic to add one and the same obstacle all over again. Our bird could just go straight and pass through them. That's why we'll have a separate variable called private that will be float spawn Y position. Now let's make a separate method for spawning our columns that will be private called spawn column. First thing we should take care of is our spawn Y position. We want our Y position to be random, meaning that some of our obstacles will be higher, some of them lower. That's why we will say spawn Y position equals random range between two values. So minimum value will be the lowest point of our columns and maximum value will be the highest point. And that's why I said that we will need these columns in our hierarchy. So click on columns and move them up to see our maximum Y position, which is 2.7, and move it down to see our minimum Y position, which is, let's say, -1. So our random range will go from -1 float to 2.7 float. Now we can delete the columns, right click and delete, and continue with our method. In order to clone our prefab, we have to use instantiate. So type instantiate, open the brackets, we will be using our prefab, with position defined with new vector 2, with x value of 4, and y value of spawn Y position. And third parameter is rotation, because we will not be using it, we'll just type quaternion dot identity. And that's it for our method. Now let's call it in start. Let's save it and try it in Unity. Before we click play, we have to specify what our prefab is. So click on spawn, find our prefab in project, and drag it to the spawn inspector. Now we can check how it looks like. So there it is, we spawned one of the obstacles. Let's spawn the rest of them. We will do that by using our onTrigger enter 2D method. So go ahead and type private void onTrigger enter 2D And now we have to make sure that only a column can trigger our collider. So type if collision, which is the parameter for this method, dot get component called columns with capital C is not equal to null. So basically, when any column triggers our collider, we will spawn one more column. And we already said how to do it in our spawn column method. So click save and let's check how it looks like. So one column is spawned, another one, another one, and that's basically it. Now we can move to destroying our columns. Let me explain you why do we destroy our objects. As you can see, the first column is not visible to player, but it's still there. And here we see that neither of them is destroyed, and there can be only more of them. Now, because we want to keep everything organized and clean, we will destroy any column that is not visible to our player. Procedure is almost the same as with our spawning, so right-click in hierarchy, create empty, rename it to destroy, and we also have to add a collider that will be triggered, so click on add component, physics 2D, box collider 2D, check is trigger, and click on edit collider to see where our collider is. It's on the bird. We will resize it first and move it behind our camera, meaning to the left. We will also have a separate destroy script, which we will add right now. So go to project, right click, create C# script, name it destroy. First add it to our game object, and then to our scripts folder. Let's go ahead and open it. This script will only have few lines of code, because we will only specify that any column that hits our trigger gets destroyed. We will again use onTrigger enter 2D, so type private void onTrigger enter 2D, and again we will specify that nothing but columns trigger our collider. So type if collision.getComponent called columns is not equal to null, meaning if this collision happens, we want to destroy collision.gameObject. Let's save, go to Unity, and play our game. Our columns are spawning, scores counting. Let's see if they get destroyed. And our column just got destroyed. This is everything that we should finish in this lesson. So see you next time when we will deal with our start scene.